G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you and I do hope you are super well. Now, normally I would be bringing you a video like this ASAP, but yes, I've had a little break. I actually been interstate for the first time since 2019, had a little bit of a road trip, checked out some awesome art, video coming about that very soon. Let's talk about these epic new releases from Apple and how does it impact your and my photographic workflow, our post-production workflow. Now this is a bit of a surprise. This is not the computer that I was expecting that I was going to buy, but I think it's the one that Apple is giving us and there's nothing else coming in the future. So let's talk about the new Mac Studio. Now, for those that haven't been following the news, yes, Apple has moved over to their own silicon for not only their phones and iPads and watches, but now it's for their personal computers. The entire Mac lineup, everything that Apple make, is going to be non-Intel by the end of this year. This transition began at the end of 2020. Lots happened in 2021, and the last pieces of the puzzle are coming together this year. Now, the machine that I was waiting for was the new 27 M1 or M2 iMac edition. What we have here over my shoulder is the current Intel. Well, it's not the current one, it's from 2017, so it's getting a little bit long in the tooth. But I was waiting for the replacement of this machine. Everybody thought that a 27-inch iMac with Apple Silicon was coming. That's what we all thought. It made sense. That's what they've been doing for more than a decade, is putting out these 27-inch Intel iMacs. But it would seem, not only by the release of the Mac Studio, along with the statement from Apple themselves saying there is only one more piece of the puzzle to come, and that is the Mac Pro, this may mean that there is no 27-inch iMac or iMac Pro with Apple Silicon coming. It's also possible that that's what Apple is saying now and something else might come in the future. But if we're to take Apple on face value, this is where we're up to. So suddenly I am in a position of having to think about whether I'm buying this machine here. And it is a very powerful and very interesting machine. And we've only had powerful iMacs in roughly the last decade or so. Prior to that, the iMac was an entry-level and mid-tier machine. But in more recent history, yes, they've been more than powerful enough to be a workstation for most use cases, and today, well, now we have Apple Silicon, which really just changes the entire landscape. I want to start with sharing what Apple Silicon means for us and what it does for content creators. Now, whether we are photographers or videographers, we're throwing around a lot of data, a lot more data than most people throw around in their day-to-day lives when they're web browsing or writing a Microsoft document or working in Excel, so on and so forth. This is not a lot of data, but photographers and videographers, man, do we love to throw data around. And we also like to store a lot of it. Now, we're now in the era of 8K, and we're now in the era where 45 megapixels and beyond is, well, becoming more and more ubiquitous. With the launch of the Sony A7 IV, 33 megapixels is now going to be their mid-range all-rounder camera. And I suspect we will see other manufacturers moving their full-frame mid-level cameras to the same sort of mark. Now, that's not a lot, but it's certainly not a little. It's a fair bit of data to throw around. And then when we're talking about shooting at 10 or 20 or even 30 frames per second with raw files, this just becomes a lot of data. If we want to work in reasonable timeframes, we do need machines that can handle all of this throughput. So I have still been, I wouldn't say happily, working on my iMac Intel up until very, very recently. But once the Z9 arrived and I started to work with 8K, it was fine. It worked. It actually handled it. But it was the renders. It was rendering out that final file, which is where the problems started. Rendering this video here, which was my first 8K video about Melbourne. And check it out. It's a beautiful video. it would take this machine behind me here almost 2.5 hours to render that 10-minute clip. That's crazy, isn't it? 2.5 hours. So I did it. And then over the holiday break, when that was made, I actually went to our city store and grabbed the M1 Mac Mini. And it's the most entry-level version, or pretty much almost the most entry-level version of the M1 Silicon. I ran exactly the same render on that machine, and that machine only has 8 gig of RAM. The machine behind me here has 64 gig of RAM, yet it was able to halve the render time. So we went from something like 2 hours and 20 minutes down to 1 hour and 10 minutes. That is literally real world usage. So that's okay. It was like, all right, well, that's the entry level one. Imagine if I get a couple of tiers up from that, and 2 hours and 20 minutes might become half an hour or something in that vicinity. And this becomes a real question of productivity. And when you're editing a video and then you're reviewing it for final release, either to YouTube or a client, you want to, if you've got to make minor fixes in that 10-minute video, and it's taking you 2.5 hours or almost 2.5 hours to get each one out, well, that's a real pain. It means you just can't get through many iterations in a day. So this is an example of where it really does impact. You can't always just go get a cup of coffee and do something else. Sometimes the deadline is looming and you've got to get the stuff out there. And of course, the Apple Silicon doesn't just affect rendering times in video, but it also affects rendering times when you're in software like Capture One, and even Nikon's NX Studio software is improved by these faster processors. So it actually affects workflow across the board. And one of my biggest bugbears, besides that render time business in video, is when you're actually going through photos after a shoot. And my current machine, I actually have to wait for the images to render before I can see, is this one in focus or not? Sometimes you can tell because they're quite out of focus, but most images are not quite out of focus. So you actually have to wait for those layers of rendering to occur. And depending on a whole lot of different circumstances, it can be quite slow. It can take 5 to 10 seconds sometimes. And if my computer's in a good mood and I've put it on the correct hard drive, because I have about 6 hard drives behind me here, and I don't mean an array with 6 hard drives in it, I mean 6 different arrays. And you want that to be instantaneous. Anything that can make that process of reviewing an image and being able to move on to the next one, to star it for the client, that's critical, and that is absolutely time lost. So in my world, with my use cases, anything that can speed up renders of both video for output and rendering an image to a screen when I'm reviewing it, these things are critical. So then I was working on my next 8K video, and I was getting frustrated. I was still working on the Intel iMac here, and it was just taking too long, and the deadline was looming, and it was like, I don't know when the Apple Silicon iMacs are coming. There was no sign of them really coming, and they were talking about them coming in the second half of this year. So I went and purchased this here, and this is the entry-level 16-inch M1 with 16 gig of RAM and all of the crazy business. What purchasing this machine did is it did get that 2-hour render time down to, and it's really interesting, I did multiple renders because I did minor tweaks to it, anywhere between like 35 minutes and something like 25 minutes for a 10-minute 8K timeline. It's a different video, it's this video here. There was another reason that I replaced my laptop, and that is because my previous laptop is a 2013 MacBook Pro. So it is 9 years old. And look, that's pretty long in the tooth. It's actually still working, and it still works fine for most things. But I don't even think it would be able to handle 8K. I wouldn't be able to edit it when I was away. And as I said, I've just been away, and I want to be able to do whatever it is I want to do with my Z9 when I'm away. So it was time for it to be upgraded anyway. And this gave me an insight, a further insight into the power of what Apple Silicon could do. We didn't expect it, but out of nowhere, yes indeed, we do have the new iMac replacement, the new high-end 27 iMac replacement, with this machine right here, the Mac Studio. And again, to reiterate, this is my belief based on statements made by Apple themselves that the only computer yet to come is the Mac Pro, the big towers. So here we are faced with a different paradigm. We've been working with the iMac. I've been working with iMacs for about a decade. Prior to that, I always bought towers because I always wanted maximum expandability. But there was a time there where Apple weren't making towers. They made the trash can Mac Pros, which were expandable, but not super expandable. They were also ridiculously expensive. And then they did make the Mac Pro in, I think, 2019, but it was mind-numbingly expensive. Yes, extraordinarily powerful, but just simply beyond reason from my perspective. I was very happy, and machines like the one behind me were working absolutely fine. But indeed, with the ever ongoing advancement of technology and megapixels and 8K video, and of course the desire to not be sitting around waiting for things to render, and of course the price of everything comes down, power gets cheaper over time, processing power. And here we are in this world, and basically the entry-level machine, to get to the point where I want to get to ultimately, is the entry-level machine here is probably something like 60% more expensive than the roughly equivalent iMac. And that's the part that annoys me. I was able to get a reasonably powerful iMac for a certain price. But now Apple have separated the computer from the screen, and they are giving us two extraordinary objects. The screen and the computer are amazing, but they're separate, which is fine. I'm happy with that, but they are more expensive. So here we are. If this is what we're confronted with, well, so be it. We just have to save up more of our pennies to get into these great machines. Now, today I didn't specifically want to talk about specs per se, but what I can say from a quick overview perspective is these are extraordinarily powerful machines. Yes, there is a lot of iterations of them, and we do have a new Apple chip, some new Apple silicon known as the Ultra. There is still space, obviously, for Apple to have yet another chip on top of this, which will end up inside the Mac Pro. But what the Ultra is two of the fastest M1 chips that exist at the moment. They've literally stuck two together. It's a crazy machine, and I've just recently read that the Ultra version, which has a much bigger heatsink in it, is about 2 pounds or almost a kilogram heavier. So this chip is running hard and it's running hot, and that's kind of counterintuitive to what Apple has previously done with all the other M1 chips and M1 objects. This thing, it does 8K, it hardly gets warm, only when you're pushing it to the absolute max. These chips and these machines must be absolute screamers. If I could get that 8K 10-minute video down to a render time of something like 10 minutes, almost real time, then I've gone from this machine here being over 2 hours to real time by this investment, and it just shows the difference in power. So I have to make the decision. What is that potentially, and I think it will be the case, what is that potential 2 hours of difference in time? What's it worth? If it will do something like what we've just discussed, and if it will make my images appear in Capture One or Lightroom or whatever software you use instantaneously or next to instantaneously, well then it's absolutely worth my time, because in the end the difference is, in this country, $1,000 to $2,000. And ultimately the productivity of $1,000 to $2,000 will be made up for very, very quickly. To answer the question that has been already asked in my comments, will I be considering the new Mac Studio? And the answer is absolutely yes. If this machine is even twice as fast as the laptop, the entry-level laptop that I have here in front of me, and I believe it will be, if not more, that is an absolute game changer and will be so much faster than the computer that's here behind me. I mean, we're talking about, in some instances, it might be 4 or 8 times faster in the real world, like in the case of rendering that 8K timeline. It's a big deal, and at the end of the day, my time is money, and that either means more time for more creating, more time for more clients, more time for looking for more clients, or more time with my kids, or more time relaxing. Either way, anything that gets me away from sitting in front of the screen for more time, just waiting for renders to happen, I think that's awesome and it's worth investing in. So yes, indeed, I will put the pricing up here of what the Mac Studio kit that I might be looking at would cost in both Australian and US dollars. There it is there. And I do think it's an amazing investment. Apple have been pretty savvy about their transition. They know that pros need their software to work, and that is why the Pro gear is only starting to arrive sort of 1 year and 18 months after they actually began the rollout. Because what that allows for is for software developers to have plenty of time to get their software native. And as a final point, I have used the Nikon software, Capture One, and of course Final Cut Pro, which is my editing software. They are all significantly different when running on Apple Silicon. I know the Capture One has been rewritten, and of course Final Cut Pro has. I'm not 100% sure about the Nikon software. There was an update that said compatibility, and I'm not sure if that means they've rewritten it or they've just done something else. But I will check that out and write something about it here. So yes, productivity is critical. Getting more time in our day for ourselves, whatever that might be, I think is important. Please let me know in the comments below, is Apple Silicon for you? And are you interested in getting a Mac Studio? And are you a 1, 2, or 3 screen sort of person? So good to see you. Thank you so much for being here today. And if this is your first time here, I would love to see you again. So please do subscribe, please share, and please like. And I will see you very, very soon. Bye for now.